Writing a book blurb is freaking hard. Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about why writing a book blurb is pretty freaking hard. And I'm going to give 5 reasons. Now these reasons are pretty specific to me and also the book blurb writing experience that I just had, but I feel like they could be pretty relatable to some of you. So if you also have these problems, I want you to let me know in the comments so that I know that I'm not alone out here with my struggles. Writing a book blurb is really important, and before I get into that, I just want to clarify the difference between a book synopsis and a book blurb, because up until recently I kind of thought they were the same thing, or that I could use those terms interchangeably, but in reality a synopsis and a book blurb are really different. So a synopsis is basically a summary of your book. It's what you're, as a writer, going to use to pitch your work to your agent, or what your agent's going to forward to a publisher. It has the main plot points and the major events of your novel condensed into a few pages. And it's not really so important what the length is, but you really want to focus on the content of this, because it's basically what's going to sell your book, not to the readers, but to the people who are going to publish it, all that good stuff. Writing a synopsis is really hard as well, but I haven't had to do that yet, so I don't really know how hard it is going to be, but I'll let you know later on down the road. Something I did just write, a book blurb on the other hand, is something a lot shorter. It's a paragraph or a few paragraphs that you would put on the back of the book or inside the dust sleeve, and it's gonna catch your reader. It's a great marketing tool that is going to hook your reader and inspire them to buy the book if you did it right. If you do it wrong, they're just gonna stick that book right back on the shelf, or they're gonna keep scrolling online, because who wants to read a book where the few paragraphs that describe the book are boring already? Nobody. These paragraphs are supposed to be really intense and really draw you in to want to read this book, and that's why there's a lot of pressure when you're writing a book blurb. By the end of it, I got a book blurb that I'm pretty satisfied with. And if you're interested in hearing that book blurb, I'll put a link in the description to my NaNoWriMo Part 3 video, in which I will be revealing the book blurb for Sanctuarium. But back to the writing part, by the end of this experience, I think I've come up with 5 pretty good reasons why writing a book blurb is so hard for me. And reason number 1, they're really short. Writers tend to fall into one of 2 categories, I guess. Overwriters and underwriters. I, however, am not an underwriter. I am definitely an overwriter, and I have a lot of trouble with over-describing things and making really long chapters and really long paragraphs, and I have to cut usually. And even in school essays I would overwrite, and even in assignments I'm gonna be cutting. Like my college applications were really hard because I would answer the essay prompt and then I would have to cut like 200 words out of it. Every word counts when you're writing a book, but in a book blurb, every word counts. In YA, book blurbs are typically 170 words-ish, so I didn't want to exceed that too much. I think I stayed pretty close to that. I'll have to check my word count. But story time, I used to write a monthly column for my local newspaper back home, and the rules of this sort of thing was that it had to be 500 words. Like, I could not exceed 500 words because that's how much space they had to fit my column in on the Sunday paper. So I would write my column out, and then it would be 700, 800 words, and I would go back in, and I would trim, and I would trim, and I would trim, and I'm thinking, okay, I cut out everything I don't need. This is just the meat. And I still like 50 words less than I had. You would go back and you would trim, and you would consolidate, and you would condense, and finally what you got was a 500-word column, but every word mattered, and it was really a lesson in brevity. And the brevity forced me to become a better writer because my words packed more weight. And that, I think, really helped me through this book blurb, because it's basically the same thing, except you're talking about your novel, and it's your baby. You want to represent it good. You gotta do it. Trim the fat, you'll be happy. Reason number 2 is that I have basically zero concept of what is not important enough for a book blurb. So a book blurb should just cover your inciting incident, your protagonist, maybe the setting briefly if it's fantasy or science fiction, and maybe like one subplot. But I, as a writer who has been very close to this work for a long time, think that everything is so crucial that you need it in this book blurb. So I want to include all of my subplots, 3 or 4 characters. I want to include the inciting incident, a major plot twist. No, wrong, incorrect. Simple, short, leave a lot of questions, give them enough to want to keep reading, but not so much that A, your book blurb is too long, and B, you reveal something really important that they shouldn't have known until the middle of the book. Going along with that, reason number 3 is also the omission of subplots. Because my book has a lot of subplots in it. Like a good 3 or 4 subplots. I don't know if that's a lot, but it's a lot, okay? It's more than one. I didn't want to include all of those subplots in the book blurb. I don't even think I really included one subplot in the book blurb. It was kind of an implied subplot mentioning, but it wasn't really there. So I had to force myself to drop some of my subplots just because I didn't have space for them. Reason number 4 is that this is a dual perspective novel. I was writing from 2 point of views. Yet in the book blurb, there really isn't a point of view because you're not writing through your characters. You're just kind of telling the reader, this is going to happen to the character, read to find out. So deciding how I should include both protagonists was really difficult. I kind of just threw them in there together, as if they were twins, doing the same exact thing. And it felt wrong. It felt awful. But at the end, it gets the point across. Because they kind of are in the same situation. I mean, they're together in the book, so the events that are happening to one are happening to the other. If this was a dual perspective novel to completely unrelated characters, that would have been significantly more difficult. But I think we got it for this. And finally, reason number 5 why writing my book blurb was super hard is the tense. So I wrote my entire novel in past tense, and the book blurb is in present tense, and I kept finding myself slipping back into past tense unintentionally. And this is something that is not just happening in a book blurb, but something that writers should always be worried about while they're writing, because sometimes, especially if you're writing in anything but past tense or third person, it's really easy to switch pronouns, to jump tenses unintentionally, and because you know what's going on, it seems like it flows, but the reader is going to be super confused when you go from they to I, or when you go from said to says. These things are really jarring, and writers tend to not notice them because obviously they're accidental, but it's something to really focus on. And in such a short piece as a book blurb, it's definitely more noticeable to the writer, and I struggled with that a lot, and I was really self-conscious about it because every other sentence would go back into past tense. And I'm thinking, that's not how this is supposed to go. I think the most difficult part of that in my book blurb this time was that the beginning 2 sentences or so are kind of setting the scene because this is a novel taking place many years in the future. And so it briefly talks about how they got to that point. And so that part is sort of in past tense, but then it's also in present tense to the characters that I'm talking about, which I would introduce toward the middle. And so getting the tenses right was something that I really had to focus on, and maybe you guys felt the same way. In the end, I'm pretty satisfied with the book blurb that I wrote, and the best advice that I can give you for getting all of these things squared away is to do your research and read a lot of other book blurbs from your genre. What I did is I just typed in dystopian YA on Amazon, and I read the first 15 or so book blurbs that came up. And this is cool in 2 ways. Is 1, you can definitely see the book blurbs that are not enticing. And 2, I found a couple books that I really want to read now, and I kind of ordered them on Amazon already, even though I'm a broke college student, and they're coming in the mail. In the end, I became really satisfied with the book blurb that I got. I wrote 2 versions, and the first one I scratched entirely. The second one is pretty solid. Again, if you're interested and you want to know what the book blurb turned out to be for my novel Sanctuarium, you can look me up on NaNoWriMo and see my NaNoWriMo profile under Matthew Pimley, or I will put a link to the description in my NaNoWriMo Part 3 video. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Yeah. I hate myself.